today we're going to be tying up a scud pattern. This one's going to be a little bit of an olive, and it's got some pretty neat techniques that I really like, and it ends up making a really good looking scud. Probably a little bit different than what we're used to looking at. So I've got a size 16 scud hook in the vise, and I'm using a 14-aught Olive Superfly now. So we're going to actually use some vinyl ribbing here, and this is size, it's a nymph size. I'd like it a little bit bigger. I've ordered some, it just hasn't gotten here yet. And I'm just going to be working with a relatively small piece here. I've already cut and tapered this with a razor blade, and that's going to be the back end, and I'm going to do the best I can to keep that on top of the shank of the hook here with my thread as I move forward up the top of the shank of the hook here. And once I get to about right there, I'm just going to go ahead and grab my razor blade again, and I'm going to pull this rib kind of upwards towards me, and I'm just going to take my razor blade and cut that at a nice little angle there, and that will just help it kind of blend in a little bit more, so you're not tying down just a nice square piece of material. Now I'm going to tie that in, hold that tight. I'm going to come back down the back end of the hook here, and we're going to secure this last little bit in here as well, that where we started. And keep in mind this is nano silk, so I can crank down on it pretty hard. I don't need to crank down too hard, but I can crank down a little bit. I really want to get that last little piece to lay down for me, just like so. And I'm going to come back up a little bit. We're going to tie in 2 pieces of peacock herl now that we've got our D-rib kind of in place here on the top of the hook. And I'm just going to use some natural, that's a nice green color. Grab one of those up there near the eye where they're a little bit bushier. And I'm also going to go with this another peacock herl, but this one has been dyed to a sulfur yellow, so that's kind of what it looks like. Find myself the herl that I'm going to want to use, and I'll just strip it off. I'm going to tie this in by the tips, so I'm going to line the tips up of my natural and of that sulfur as close as I can. Then I'm going to pinch them together. I'm going to cut that off just a little bit because those very ends are incredibly brittle, and I just don't have the touch. I just end up breaking them. I'm going to give myself a little bit of thread because I don't want to crank down on these, especially as we get down to where we're tying them at the very back of the abdomen. So we're just going to start here, get those started, and then we're going to work our way down around the bend of the hook to where that abdomen is going to start. And I'm not going to crank down on these wraps because I do not want this thread to cut through those herls. And being nano silk, it's very strong, and you can very easily, I do it all the time, just cut right through those herls. From there, I'm just going to go ahead and bring clean things up a little bit, but bring my thread back up towards the front of our hook here. So then I'm going to take these 2 herls, I'm going to hold them straight up, and we're going to avoid the hook point because that'll cut right through these fibers as well. And we're going to try to take as close as we can of touching wraps as we move up the shank of the hook here. like so. We've got that just about to where we want it. Right about there is going to be good. We've got a few more materials we're going to tie in at the top, so I'm going to tighten up my thread a little bit. Take a couple of wraps over the top of those herls, locking them into place. Then I'll pull those herls back towards the bend of the hook. Take another couple of wraps just right in front of them. They're not going to go anywhere, so I'm going to reach in now with my scissors and we'll cut out the balance of those two herls. So we're kind of looking like this right now. We've got a nice buggy looking. I like the way that the peacock herl makes those legs look. From here you can use an eraser. You might even be able to use fire, a flame, a lighter. I'm going to use an eraser that's kind of a powered eraser. And really what I'm going to be doing, and I won't show the whole thing, but I'm going to be very gentle, but I want to remove all of the fibers that are on the very top of the hook while keeping the ones under the hook in place. Okay, so once we've got it to about here where we've kind of erased from the top, so we have that nice smooth top like we would want on a scud, and then we still have all the nice little fibers down here below that will look like the legs on our scud. The other nice thing, because we use that sulfur yellow, is we end up with kind of a banding, a really nice looking banding. We'll put some UV on this and it'll stand out even more, but you've kind of got that green alternating with that sulfur yellow. From here we're going to go ahead and tie in a tiny little piece of scud back, and I'm using about a 1/8 and it's olive, looking about like that. I'm going to go ahead and cut just the smallest little point on there with my scissors. So we have something like that, and then I'm just going to go ahead and before I tie that in, this is a really good time to reposition the hook. Okay, so here's our scud back. It's about a 1/8 olive. We've cut a little point out of it already. I'm going to hold that in place. I'm going to spin my thread counterclockwise so it'll jump back more towards my fingers and not over the eye of the hook. So we're just going to take it like that. We'll take a couple of nice tight thread wraps to secure that into place. I want to keep that on the top of the hook shank here. And what I'm going to do is look and see how far back I want to go for the thorax on this particular pattern. So we're going to go back a little ways. That's probably going to be just about fine, and then we'll just come back in and we're going to clean that up a little bit. Give myself some thread, and we're actually going to use a dubbing loop here. So to do a dubbing loop, I'm just going to take my finger. I've got some extra thread. I'm going to wrap that more or less around that finger. I'm going to let my thread drop on the far side. Change hands. I don't have to do that. I'm just kind of weird. I'm going to take a couple of wraps around the base of that dubbing loop. And that'll help us just make sure we hold that nice and in place. And then I'm going to come down to about there, not all the way down to the eye. And I'm going to grab, in this case I'm just going to use a hook, a dubbing hook. So I'm just going to hook my dubbing loop into that hook, and I'm going to just let that sit there for just a moment. And from there I'm going to grab some CDC in olive. It looks like it's about time to get another bag. I'm going to grab two good looking fibers out here that have some nice long fibers coming off the stem of the feather. So, you know, something like that. And then I'm going to line those up. So once I've got that way, I'm just going to go ahead and stroke some of these fibers, not hard, but I'm going to stroke some of those fibers just out so that they're a little bit more perpendicular to the shaft. I'm going to grab my tool that I use for more or less just a clip. We're going to go ahead and capture. Like that. Where I have enough space there, I need to have some space there so that I can put that in my dubbing loop. And from there, I'm just going to grab my scissors, and the cuts that I make here, I want to cut as close to the shaft of that feather as possible. So I'm going to end up with something like that. I'm going to grab my dubbing loop here. I'm going to open it up just a little bit here. Hopefully you can see that. I'm going to stick my CDC fibers right into that dubbing loop, and then I'm going to let that dubbing loop close while at the same time I'm going to let go of those fibers. So we've got something that looks like that. I'm going to now spin my dubbing hook here, and what that will do is help us lock in those CDC fibers so they don't just come undone, or that they don't just pull out. So once I've got a few turns on that, we're going to go ahead and wrap this up near the eye of the hook. So I'm going to hold that straight up and down. I'm going to wet my fingers. I'm going to try to pull some of those fibers back. Try to keep that thin skin out of the way. I'm trying to take just some touching wraps moving up. It's going to look a little messy. It's okay. We like messy. And we're going to take this all really pretty much up to the eye of the hook here. So now that I've got that way, I'm going to go ahead and release my thread from my bobbin cradle. We're going to lock this dubbing loop into place so we can cut it off. So I'm going to take a couple of wraps just right over the top of that dubbing loop, and then I'm going to pull that dubbing loop back towards the bend of the hook, and then I'm going to throw in a couple of thread wraps much more close to the eye of the hook here. Just like that, I can come in now with my scissors and we can cut out the balance of that dubbing loop, which is just the thread that we were using. Just like that. From there, once again, I'm going to wet my fingers. I'm going to pull those fibers back, those CDC fibers back. I'm going to start tying some wraps over the top of them, and that will help us just make sure they maintain that kind of a backwards trajectory. You may end up with one like I do right now, that's going over the eye of the hook, but by and large that's exactly what I want this to look like. I can come in now with my tweezers and take care of that. We're now ready to grab our scud back, and we're going to kind of wiggle it back and forth while we're stroking these fibers back, our CDC. I'm going to take a wrap, trying not to get this crimped or pinched, but I'm going to take a couple of pretty good solid wraps there over the top of that thin skin. I'm going to throw the pull the thin skin backwards and get a couple of good thread turns as well, just right behind the eye, but not on the thin skin. Then we're going to come back with our thin skin. We're going to take another turn or two here, pull it nice and tight, and from there I can just come on in. And what I do with thin skin is I like to hold it pretty straight up, but I'm going to put some tension on it because it is really stretchy, and that will just help you not have quite as much of a bulk on the head of this fly. From there, I'm just going to clean that head up a little bit with just a couple of thread wraps right behind the eye, moving back up onto my scud back. Give myself a tiniest little bit of thread so that I can come on in with my whip finisher. This time we will be finishing. So we're going to take 4 or 5 turns with our whip finisher here. Let's turn that sideways, grab the other end of my whip finisher, and I'm going to cut that thread off. In theory. Okay, so now we just have a little bit of cleaning up to do. I like the look. I like what I'm seeing here, but I do have some of these fibers here that are just way too long for me for this fly. So I'm going to just come in with my tweezers and grab a hold of those. I like them to break off more than I like them to pull all the way off, just so they can keep the bulk, but sometimes you're successful doing that and sometimes you're not. So I'm using my UV thin resin, and I'm just going to get the smallest amount, get it up over the top here. A little bit from side to side, so I'll turn it a little bit, and I do want it to go all the way back down to the back end. Okay, so once I've got that on there, I'll go ahead and hit that with our torch, our flashlight, our UV light, and with that we're pretty much finished. So we've got the nice scud with the back, and you can hopefully now see with the UV the alternating of that sulfur yellow with a regular green. We've got our nice little legs down here, and then we've added this CDC with some scud back at the very top. I love the CDC because it moves a lot in the water. This is just a wonderful scud pattern, fun to tie, very effective. So throw a hook in your vise and give it a go.